That's the part that bothers me the most looking back. He wasn't doing anything obvious. No staring, no waving, nothing that would make you stop and think something was wrong. He was just there, like any other neighbor you barely pay attention to. We had moved into that house about 5 months before everything happened. It was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where every house looked slightly different, but followed the same general layout. 2 stories, small front yards, fenced backyards, and just enough space between houses that you felt like you had privacy. The house next to ours had been empty when we moved in. About 2 months later, someone moved in. I only noticed because I saw a moving truck one afternoon when I got home from work. There were a couple of guys unloading furniture, and one man standing on the driveway watching them. I didn't think much of it. New neighbor. That was it. I gave a quick nod as I walked up to my front door. He didn't nod back. He just looked at me. Not in an aggressive way. Just watched. I told myself he probably didn't see me properly or was distracted. I went inside and didn't think about it again. Over the next few weeks, I would see him occasionally. Always outside. Never in a rush. Sometimes standing in his driveway. Sometimes near the side of his house. Sometimes just there. And every time he was looking in the general direction of our house. Again, nothing that immediately set off alarms, until I started noticing the timing. I worked part-time at a warehouse, and my schedule changed a lot. Some days I worked early mornings, other days late evenings. My parents both worked regular hours, and my younger sister had school during the day. There were a few times where I came home in the middle of the day, earlier than usual, and every single time he was outside, standing in almost the exact same spot near the side of his house. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then it started happening too consistently. One afternoon, I got home around 2 p.m. instead of my usual 5. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw him standing near the fence between our yards, facing directly toward our house. He didn't move when I parked. He didn't look away. He just stood there, watching. I sat in my car for a few seconds, pretending to check something on my phone, just to see if he would go inside. He didn't. Eventually, I got out and walked toward the front door. As I passed, I glanced over. He was still looking at me, not blinking, not smiling, just staring. I went inside quickly and locked the door. That was the first time I felt genuinely uncomfortable. I told my mom about it later that evening. She brushed it off. "He's probably just curious," she said. "New neighborhood, new people." That made sense. At least it sounded like it did. But things kept getting worse. About a week later, I stayed home from work because I wasn't feeling well. My parents left in the morning, and my sister went to school, so I was alone in the house. Around 10:30 a.m., I went downstairs to get something to drink. As I walked into the kitchen, I froze. He was in our backyard, not fully inside, but standing right up against the fence, looking through it, directly into our kitchen window. I stopped moving. He didn't. He just stood there, staring in. Our fence had small gaps between the wooden slats. Not enough to see everything clearly, but enough to make out shapes and movement. Enough to know someone was there. I slowly stepped back, keeping my eyes on him. Then I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He didn't answer. I called my mom. She picked up. I told her everything. She sounded more serious this time. "Stay inside," she said. "Lock the doors. I'll call someone." I went around the house and checked every lock again. Front door, back door, windows. Everything was secure. When I went back to the kitchen a few minutes later, he was gone. Completely gone. Like he had never been there. That night, my dad went over to his house. I watched from our front window. He knocked, waited, knocked again. No answer. He came back and said, maybe the guy wasn't home. But I knew he had been. I had seen him. After that, things changed. feeling comfortable in my own house, especially when I was alone. I started noticing small things, like how sometimes the blinds in his house would be slightly open, just enough to see out, or how I would catch a glimpse of movement in his window when I was outside. But the worst part was how he seemed to know when I was alone. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, I got home early again. As I turned into the street, I saw him immediately, standing in his driveway, facing our house, waiting. It felt like he had been expecting me. I parked quickly and went inside, locked the door, closed the blinds. I stayed in the living room trying to distract myself. About 10 minutes later, I heard something, a soft sound, from the back of the house. I froze, listened. Nothing. Then it came again. A light tapping sound, coming from the back door. I stood up slowly, walked toward the kitchen. Every step felt heavier than the last. As I got closer, I could see the outline of someone through the glass, standing right outside the door. I stopped. My heart started pounding. Then he knocked. 3 slow knocks. I didn't move. He knocked again. Same pattern. Then he spoke. Hey, just one word. Calm. Casual. Like nothing was wrong. I stayed completely silent. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. I know you're home. I backed away immediately, grabbed my phone, dialed 911. As it rang, I heard the handle move. He tried to open the door. It didn't budge. He tried again, harder this time. Then he stopped. Complete silence. The dispatcher answered. I told her everything. She said officers were on the way. I stayed on the line, sitting on the floor in the living room, staring toward the kitchen. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps, moving along the side of the house. Then nothing. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. They searched the area, knocked on his door. No answer. Again. But this time, they looked more closely. One of the officers walked around the side of his house, then called the others over. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see their expressions change. They came back and asked me a few questions. Then one of them said something that I'll never forget. He's not supposed to be living there. I felt my chest tighten. What do you mean? I asked. The house is vacant, he said. I stared at him. That's not possible, I said. I've seen him. He's been there for weeks. The officer nodded slowly. We're going to check inside. They forced the door open. It took a few minutes. Then one of them came back out and called for backup. Later that evening, my parents told me what they found. The house was empty. No furniture. No signs of anyone living there, except for one thing. In the upstairs bedroom, facing our house, there was a chair, positioned directly in front of the window, and next to it, a pair of binoculars. They never found him. No name. No record. Nothing. The house was secured after that. New locks. Checked regularly. But even now, every time I look out a window, I can't shake the feeling that someone might still be watching. I didn't even know his name. That's what makes it worse. If something like this happens with someone you actually know, at least there's context. There's a reason they're around. A reason they might talk to you or look in your direction. With him, there was nothing. Just a house across the street, and a man who somehow knew more about my routine than he should have. I had just moved into my apartment about 3 months before everything started. It was a small 2-story building with 6 units total. Mine was on the 2nd floor, facing the street. Directly across from the building was a row of older houses, each with a small front yard and a short driveway. The neighborhood itself felt normal. Not overly friendly, but not sketchy either. People kept to themselves. That's why I didn't notice him at first. I only became aware of him because of something small. The way he would be outside at the exact same times I was. Every morning, I left for work at 7:40. And almost every morning, as I walked down the stairs and out to the parking lot, he was standing on his porch. Not sitting. Not doing anything. Just standing. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Maybe he smoked. Maybe he left for work around the same time. But he never had a cigarette. Never a phone. Never keys. He just stood there and watched. Not directly, at least not in a way you could easily call out, but enough that I could feel it. After about a week of this, I started testing it. One morning, I left 10 minutes earlier than usual, 7:30. As I stepped outside, I looked across the street. He was already there, standing on the porch, same spot, facing my building. That made my stomach tighten. I told myself maybe he just happened to be outside earlier that day. So the next morning, I did something else. I stayed inside longer, waited until 7:50, then left. And there he was, still outside, same position. That was the moment it stopped feeling like coincidence. It felt like timing, like he was adjusting based on me. I tried to ignore it. People have weird habits. Maybe he just liked being outside in the morning. But then it started happening at other times. I worked irregular shifts, so some days I got home around 3 p.m., other days closer to 6. And no matter what time I came back, he was there. Not always on the porch, sometimes near the mailbox, sometimes at the edge of the driveway, but always outside, always facing my building, always looking. One afternoon, I got home earlier than usual, around 2:15. As I pulled into the parking lot, I immediately looked across the street. He wasn't there, for the first time. I felt a strange sense of relief, like maybe I had been overthinking everything. I parked, grabbed my bag, and went inside, locked the door, dropped my keys on the counter. And that's when I heard it. A faint sound, from outside my apartment, not from the hallway, from the outside wall. I froze. My apartment had a window that faced directly toward the street. I moved slowly toward it, careful not to make any noise. Then I leaned slightly to the side and looked through the edge of the blinds. He was there, standing directly below my window, looking up. I pulled back immediately. My heart started racing. He hadn't been there when I parked, which meant he came out as soon as I went inside, as soon as he knew I was home. I stayed completely still for a few seconds. Then I slowly looked again. He hadn't moved, still standing there, still looking up, not trying to hide it anymore. That's when it stopped feeling like passive observation. It felt intentional, like he wanted me to know. I stepped back from the window and grabbed my phone. I thought about calling someone, the police, a friend, anyone. But I hesitated, because technically, he hadn't done anything. He was just standing outside, on the sidewalk. That's it. So instead, I waited. About 5 minutes later, I checked again. He was gone. Just like that. That night, I barely slept. Every small sound made me jump. Every passing car felt louder than it should have. The next morning, I almost didn't go to work, but I did. And when I stepped outside, he was there, on the porch, like always. That's when I decided to confront him, not aggressively, just enough to break whatever pattern this was. I walked across the street, straight toward him. As I got closer, he didn't move, didn't react, just watched me approach. "Hey," I said. No response. "Do you live here?" I asked. He nodded once. That was it. No words. "Okay," I said slowly. "I just wanted to ask, have you been watching my apartment?" He tilted his head slightly, like he didn't understand the question. Then he said something. Quiet, almost monotone. "I see you." That didn't help. At all. "I mean," I said, trying to stay calm, "you're outside every time I leave or come home." He didn't respond, just kept looking at me. Then, After a few seconds, he said, "You're predictable." I felt a chill run through me. "What?" I asked. "You leave at the same time," he said. "Come back at different times. But I know when." I took a step back. "Why?" I asked. No answer. Just that same blank stare. I didn't say anything else. I turned and walked back across the street. I could feel his eyes on me the entire time. After that, things got worse. Subtle at first, then more obvious. I started noticing that my blinds would be slightly moved when I got home. Not open, just shifted. Like someone had touched them. My doormat would be out of place. Small things, but consistent. Then one night, it escalated. I got home late, around 8:30 p.m. It was already dark. As I walked up the stairs to my apartment, I had that feeling again, like I was being watched. I turned around, and there he was, standing at the edge of the parking lot, closer than he had ever been before. Not across the street, not on the sidewalk. Right there, inside the lot, watching me. I froze. We just stared at each other for a few seconds. Then he took a step forward. I turned immediately and rushed inside. Locked the door, checked it twice. Then I stood there, listening. Nothing. For about a minute. Then, a knock. On my door, 3 slow knocks. My chest tightened. I didn't move. Another knock. Same pattern. Then his voice. Right outside. "I know you're home." I backed away, grabbed my phone, started dialing. Then he said something that made everything worse. "I watched you come in." I whispered to the dispatcher what was happening. She told me officers were on the way. I stayed on the line. The knocking stopped. Silence. Then footsteps. Moving away. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They searched the area. Knocked on the house across the street. No answer. The next day, I found out something. That house had been empty for over a year. No one had been living there. No utilities. No registered tenant. Nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. A few days later, I moved out. I didn't feel safe staying there. As I was packing my things, I found something behind my couch. A piece of paper. Folded. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. It was a list. Times. My times. When I left. When I came back. Even the days I stayed home. All written down. Carefully. Like a schedule. At the bottom, there was one line. Written differently. Darker. "I see you." It didn't start with fear. That's probably the reason it went on for as long as it did. Nothing about our neighbor seemed threatening at first. There was no staring, no strange conversations, nothing that would make you think something was wrong. If anything, he was the kind of person most people would completely overlook. Quiet, kept to himself, rarely outside. That was exactly why we didn't notice what was happening until it was too late. We had moved into that house about 8 months before everything unfolded. It was in a calm neighborhood, mostly families, a few older couples, nothing unusual. Our house sat between 2 others, with a wooden fence separating the backyards. The neighbor on the left was a family we talked to occasionally. The neighbor on the right, the one this is about, was someone we barely knew. He lived alone. Middle-aged, maybe early 60s. We saw him maybe once every couple of weeks, usually just pulling into his driveway or taking out the trash. No small talk, no interaction. Just there. Looking back, that should have made things more suspicious. But it didn't, because at the time, it just felt normal. The first thing that felt off was so small that I almost didn't even register it. I came home from work one evening, walked into the kitchen, and noticed the back door was unlocked. That wasn't unusual on its own. What was unusual was that I remembered locking it that morning. I always checked it twice before leaving. Still, I told myself I must have forgotten. That's the problem with small inconsistencies. They're easy to dismiss. A few days later, it happened again. This time, it was the hallway light. I was sure I had turned it off before leaving, but when I got home, it was on. Again, not a big deal. People forget things. I told myself that's what it was. For about 2 weeks, nothing major happened. Just small things. A cabinet slightly open. A chair moved a few inches. A different channel on the TV. Each one easy to explain on its own. But together, they started to feel like a pattern. My parents noticed it too. We talked about it once over dinner. My mom said maybe one of us was just forgetting things. My dad said maybe the house wiring was acting up. None of us jumped to the obvious conclusion, because it didn't seem possible, until the day it became impossible to ignore. It was a Thursday. My parents were both at work, and I had come home early because my shift was cut short. I got back around 2 p.m. As I pulled into the driveway, everything looked normal, nothing out of place. I grabbed my keys, walked to the front door, and unlocked it. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air felt different. That's the only way I can describe it, like the house wasn't empty. I stood there for a few seconds, listening. Nothing. Complete silence. Then I walked into the living room, and that's when I saw it. A glass on the coffee table, half full of water. That hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. No one had been home. No one had used that glass. I felt a tightness in my chest. I looked around the room. Everything else seemed normal. But that glass, it didn't belong. I stepped closer. The water was still. No dust. No sign it had been sitting there for long. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. I backed away slowly and grabbed my phone. I was about to call my dad when I heard something. A sound from upstairs. A soft movement, like a floorboard creaking under weight. I froze. Every part of my body went still. Then it happened again. A step. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was upstairs. I didn't think. I ran. Out the front door. Down the driveway. I didn't stop until I reached the sidewalk. Then I called 911. I told them everything. They told me to stay where I was. Within minutes, police arrived. They entered the house carefully, checked every room, every closet, every space. They didn't find anyone, but they did find something. In my parents' bedroom, a bag, not ours, sitting in the corner of the room. Inside it were clothes, food wrappers, a flashlight, things someone would carry if they were staying somewhere temporarily. The officer looked at me and said something I won't forget. "He's been here more than once." That was the moment everything changed, because now it wasn't a possibility. It was real. Someone had been in our house, multiple times, and not just passing through, staying, living, at least for short periods. The police asked if we knew anyone who might have access. We said no. They asked about spare keys, and that's when my dad remembered. We used to keep one, hidden outside, near the side of the house, under a loose brick. We hadn't checked it in months. When the officer went to look, it was gone. That's how he had been getting in. Not forcing anything, not breaking anything, just using a key, walking in like he belonged there. The police checked the surrounding houses, including the neighbor on the right. He answered the door. Calm, cooperative, said he hadn't seen anything unusual. They left, but something didn't feel right. The next day, my dad installed cameras, one in the living room, one in the hallway, and one facing the back door. Then we waited. 2 days passed. Nothing happened. Then, on the third day, we caught him. We were all out of the house again, this time on purpose. We wanted to see if he would come back. When we reviewed the footage later, there it was, the back door unlocking. Slowly, same face, completely calm. He walked into the kitchen first, opened the fridge, took something, a drink, then walked through the house, like he had done it before, like he knew exactly where everything was. He went upstairs, disappeared for a few minutes, then came back down, sat in the living room, turned on the TV, and just sat there, relaxed, like it was his house. We watched the footage in silence. None of us said anything, because there was nothing to say. We called the police again. This time, they arrested him, searched his house, and what they found made everything worse. He had a notebook with detailed entries, dates, times, notes about when we left, when we came back, even how long we stayed in certain rooms. He had been watching us for weeks, maybe longer, learning our routine, then using it. But the worst part wasn't the notebook. It was something else. Photos, printed, of our house, from different angles, from the backyard, from the side, even from inside. Photos taken from inside our house, while we weren't there. That's when it really hit me. He hadn't just been coming in. He had been living parts of his life in our house, sitting on our couch, walking through our rooms, sleeping upstairs, using our things, without us ever knowing. They took him away that night. We never saw him again. The locks were changed. The spare key was gone. Everything was secured. But it didn't matter, because once you know something like that happened, you can't unknow it. Even now, sometimes when I'm alone in a house, I think about it, about how easy it was for him, how normal it must have felt to walk in, sit down, stay, and I can't help but wonder how many times he was there. When we were already home,